Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Behind the Headlines, and in this programme today we'll be discussing England's opening game of the Qatar 2022 World Cup against Iran. In recent days we've seen a number of Iranian footballers and sports personalities come out and speak out against the Iranian regime, calling upon FIFA to ban Iran from this year's World Cup because of the suppression of human rights and women's rights in Iran. Plus, we're also seeing that Ukraine is also calling for Iran to be kicked out of the World Cup for supplying Russia with kamikaze military drones that are killing innocent civilians. So we'll be asking in this programme, should Iran be kicked out of this year's World Cup? And in this programme, I'm joined by my good friend, Alistair Scott. Alistair, thank you so much for joining me in this interesting Behind the Headlines that combines both of our passions of Israel, the Middle East, but also football as well.
Oh, yes, we've got a lot of things in common there.
Definitely. And we see that the opening of the World Cup is going to start on Sunday, the 20th of November, controversially in Qatar. And we know that that was a very controversial decision made by FIFA to give the Qataris the World Cup. This is the first Winter World Cup and also the first time a Middle Eastern nation has hosted the World Cup. And considering Qatar's links and support for the Muslim Brotherhood, involvement in international terrorism, it seems like a bizarre country to award the notorious and prize of hosting the World Cup.
Yeah, it was such a crazy, all the way through from the very first day when it was accepted or announced. There's been so much controversy around the whole thing. And it's obviously to do with finances. A nation like Qatar or any of those Middle East nations have the finances to put a lot of money up front. And I mean, it's been so disruptive because even looking at the football seasons that are throughout Europe and most of the world, it's through our winter season. And that's why we've never, ever, as far as I know, had a World Cup in a winter season. So it breaks up our season in this country. But more than anything else, of course, it's the whole Qatari regimes and the Iranian regime, which we look at particularly today, it makes it a very difficult situation. Good question.
Absolutely. And also what's so interesting as well is that several high-profile Iranian footballers and sports personalities in Iran are actually calling upon FIFA to kick the Iranian football team out of the World Cup because of the regime's oppressive human rights record. And ever since we saw the murder of the 22-year-old Masha Amini in police custody for not wearing her hijab properly, that has sparked riots and protests right across Iran. We've seen these incredibly brave and courageous women take off their hijabs, cut their own hair in solidarity with the women of Iran. And now the regime has responded by murdering over 200 protesters, including 23 women. So this is the Iranian people themselves are now calling for FIFA to take decisive action, the international community to take decisive action and kick the Iranians out.
It's obviously the right thing to do. It's very, very near the opening dates, as we know. It's coming up within a few weeks' time. But the pressure will be on, obviously, to just let things go, because, I mean, so often it's said, should politics and sport, should there be any sort of connection? But of course there has to be. We've seen that in the whole Ukraine situation with Russia being banned from sporting involvement in the football major tournaments and so on. And the same thing goes here. And I think you mentioned there about the 23, I think it's 23 children were amongst those 200 protesters that have been murdered, literally just taken out by the regime there. And so, yeah, the obvious answer is they should be chucked out of the World Cup even at this late stage. And you know, there's Ukraine, there's UAE who came close to qualifying. There are other teams who would be more than happy and ready to take their place. But it's a decision that will be a tough one to make, and the nearer it gets to the event, they need to make that decision now. And I think, as you said, you made it very clear, the protests that are going on in Iran because of the situation is coming even from their own sports personalities. And I think it's so wrong when you've got a nation like the Russian situation or like Iran to give them a platform in sport where they can sit there and say, look how well our sporting people are doing. Even if they were to get beaten 5-0 in the opening game against England or not qualify through the first lots of rounds, it still is a platform for the regime to take sort of kind of glory, and it's probably the wrong word, but take some kind of a positivity out of it. And I think it's important for us as a station to highlight this, and it's really quite refreshing to do this story rather than looking at our own politics in this nation.
Absolutely, and that definitely makes a break. But also I think it's important to note as well that Iran has supplying Putin with these kamikaze drones that are killing innocent civilians in one of Europe's major cities, which is Kiev, and other Ukrainian cities, almost like what Britain faced during the Second World War by the German V2 bombers, which had really no control. Putin has been using these Iranian-supplied drones to target residential buildings, railway stations, power stations, to put fear and terror into the hearts of ordinary Ukrainians. So we know that the world is standing in solidarity with Ukraine and President Zelensky in his fight against Russia. And we're seeing that because of Iran's support for the war in Russia's war, Putin's war against Ukraine, even I think deploying Iranian troops onto European soil is a warning. And I think this is an opportunity for the international community plus FIFA now to kick Iran out of the World Cup. And of course, this is going to be, as we gather up and the hype begins to build for the World Cup, Qatar 2022, and particularly with England's opening game of the tournament against Iran. I think this story is going to grow, it's going to develop, and there's going to be more and more pressure and scrutiny on this game. And of course, what a very powerful message it would be if FIFA had the courage to say, enough's enough. We are kicking, just as we kicked Russia out of FIFA, we should also kick Iran out of FIFA. And what kind of message would that send to those brave and courageous Iranian women standing up for their liberty and freedom, and to know that the Iranian regime has to explain how they are not in this year's FIFA World Cup finals.
It would be such an important message to get out there, and it would be such an opportunity for the FIFA to actually take a front-line approach rather than wait for a government to tell them you can't do it or whatever has happened in the past. But we've seen this alliance between Iran and Russia getting stronger and stronger over several years, and certainly in the recent months, the connection with the work in the Syrian border of Israel there too. But the recent attacks using Iranian drones, it's unusual for Russians to be supplied by Iran rather than the other way around, because usually the missiles and the rockets and everything else come from the major countries to the slightly minor countries. But this time they're using the technology of Iran to attack Ukraine, and as you say, even troops, Iranian troops, are being used by the Russians to actually go into the ground of Ukraine. So it's something that really, it's such an opportunity to do the right thing for FIFA, and I'm sure our own footballers, if they're playing against Iran, I mean, okay, player to player, they probably respect one another, but it'll be a difficult thing for them to actually turn up and play against a team which represents a country which is basically leading terrorism around the world, but particularly at this time with what's going on in Ukraine. Because one thing about our nation in Ukraine, we've built this very close relationship since this Russian war. It was good anyway, but since the Russian war, at government level and even at public level, there's real support for Ukraine. So I would imagine for footballers playing against a nation who is actually supplying equipment that's killing innocent people, children and all the rest, and civilians in Ukraine, would be a tough one for them to swallow, I think.
Absolutely. So let's have a look and remind ourselves why these Iranian footballers and sports personalities are really pleading to the governing body of FIFA to make the correct and bold move to kick Iran out of this year's World Cup, knowing the oppression that they are bringing upon the women and the people of Iran. Let's have a look.
These students are shouting death to the dictator. What began as protest over the death of a 22-year-old woman, Masha Amini, for not wearing her hijab properly, has become a cry for regime change. The cries have now become a global movement. In the streets of Paris, Rome, Toronto, Santiago, Chile, and many other cities, hundreds of thousands have gone to the streets. One act during these protests is women cutting their own hair.
I cut them for show my solidarity with the women in Iran, because it's the minimum things that I can do.
And all I have to say about this is that it's about time, because for over 40 years, the people of Iran have been dealing with this, and the West, despite the fact that they're supposed to be a bastion of liberal values, true liberal values and progressive values, equality between men and women, we have not stepped up enough when it comes to supporting the people of Iran against this dictatorship.
In Iran, members of the parliament shouted their loyalty to Iran's supreme leader, and Iran's President Ibrahim Raisi vowed the protesters would pay a price.
Those who took part in these disturbances and disturbed the security of the society and harmed people's lives and belongings must be brought to justice, including those who provoked them or encouraged them to protest.
So far, Iranian police have killed nearly 150 people during the protest. This scene shows a policeman shooting a demonstrator in cold blood. Hundreds more have been arrested and reportedly tortured. The latest epicenter of the protest seems to be Sharif University in Tehran. Reports on social media say it's become a battlefield after military forces surrounded the school without allowing students to leave. Reza Pahlavi, the son of Iran's Shah who held power before the Iranian Revolution, tweeted, "The Islamic Republic is firing on students at Iran's Sharif University. Yet reports indicate the U.S. may send this criminal regime billions yet again."
And excellent report there, as always, by CBN. We've got to pray for those brave and courageous demonstrators in Iran who are demonstrating for their freedom. And we are seeing that this is the biggest revolution to occur in Iran since the Islamic extremists took power in 1979. I think the Iranian people have just said enough's enough. They don't want to be ruled over by an Islamic dictatorship anymore. They are fed up with the regime spending billions and billions of its own kind of revenue in fighting foreign wars, supporting the proxies in Yemen, supporting Bashar al-Assad in Syria and Iran, supporting Hamas and Hezbollah, wanting to acquire nuclear weapons, threatening to wipe Israel off the face of the earth. And now it's the women of Iran who are speaking up for their freedoms against this regime. So you can potentially see that pressure is mounting upon this regime, and also shows courage on behalf of Iranian footballers and sports personalities and other celebrities in Iran to make such a brave and courageous stand against this evil and vile regime.
Yeah, as we saw in that report, the whole world is responding in the right way against what's going on. And you know, even Biden said a couple of weeks ago, didn't he, that they support these courageous, brave young people who are protesting against the regime. But at the same time, they are beginning to open the finances to the Iranians so that they're able to use more and more finances to arm themselves and get the weaponry out there. I mean, it's horrendous to watch the film we've just seen of innocent people who are protesting things that we could do in this nation. We can go out and stand outside Downing Street. I've seen it myself very often when we've been out there in teams evangelizing. You know, they're out there openly. There's no sort of one aiming a gun at them because they're coming against the government thinking. But you see what's going on in in Iran. And these footballers and sportsmen and women who are protesting, they know they're under threat of death, and the young people in the streets. But I mean, there has been a massive move in Iran of Christianity. There's a Holy Spirit move, and you can see that's probably also generating this sort of boldness to stand up against a regime which is oppressive. It's doing things that shouldn't be allowed in any nation, and we're supposed to have freedom in the world. But so what we're seeing at ground level, public level, needs to be now brought up into the more major levels by governments doing more than just words, but actually bringing back the sanctions that were on Iran for such a long time until we had a change in the presidential situation in the USA, and for places like FIFA, the Olympic people, they can put pressure on a nation in a different way. I mean, the governments put the financial pressure, but I suppose that's another thing that maybe why Qatar or the FIFA are thinking, with it being Iran and they're local, they might get more supporters coming in to watch the games. But that's not a good reason for allowing them to take part. They may have qualified legitimately by winning games and so on, but the regime needs to be punished, really. I mean, I don't like to use the word punish, but they need to be held to account. And nations are not very good at that, and certainly sporting associations are even less good at that. But there's a good opportunity for FIFA to do the right thing.
And it's the use of soft power. I think this is the main thing. We've tried economic sanctions, even the threat under, I think, the Trump administration of military action unless the Iranian regime stops its production of nuclear weapons. And now we're also seeing that these brave Iranian footballers have actually written a legal letter to FIFA. And this is what it says, and this is according to an article in Sports Talk. It says a group of Iranian soccer and sports personalities have announced that with the guidance of and in collaboration with the law firm Rusu Crespo of Valencia, Spain, a formal request has been sent to the International Federation Association, FIFA, and its president, Gianni Infantino, to suspend the Iranian Football Association, Football Federation, Islamic Republic of Iran, with immediate effect, and they effectively ban them from coming to the World Cup starting on the 20th of November 2022, only a few weeks away. Iran's brutality and belligerence towards its own people has reached tipping point, demanding an unequivocal and firm disassociation from the footballing and sports world. FIFA's historical absence from political quagmires has often only been tolerated when these situations do not materialize into the footballing sphere. The situation for women in Iran is deeply unpalatable in broader and political, social, economic framework. Tragically, the same evils and wrongs are perpetuated within the football sphere. Tragically, it says here, effectively meaning that football, which should be a safe place for everyone, is not a safe space for women or even men. Women have been consistently denied access to stadia across the country and systematically excluded from the football ecosystem in Iran, which simply contrasts with FIFA's values and statutes. If women are not allowed into stadia across the country and the Iranian Football Federation is simply following and enforcing governmental guidelines, they cannot be seen as independent organisation and free from any form or kind of influence. This is a violation of Article 19 of FIFA's statutes. This provision has in the past been the premise for the suspension of football associations like the Kuwaiti FA, Indian FA, and even the Iranian Federation in the past. The situation in Iran is no different from a country's government requiring the Football Association to enforce a stadium ban on people of a certain race or ethnicity. This letter goes on to say, it says it is no different from a government requiring that a member association changes the offside rule across the leagues in the country. In these other instances, FIFA would more likely move rapidly to suspend such a member associations, especially in the second hypothetical situation concerning the laws of the game. The Iranian Football Federation clearly lacks the autonomy to apply FIFA statutes, by the latter its regulations and, most importantly, its cherished values. It goes on to say, if however, FIFA thinks that the Iranian Football Association is not under the influence of the government and is acting solely as an independent organisation, then the forbidding of all women from entering stadiums and participating in the World Cup violates Article 3 and Article 4 of FIFA statutes. FIFA will respect and protect internationally recognised human rights. By Article 16 of the same statutes, FIFA Council is statutory, empowered to take drastic action immediately against them. The FIFA Council can and must immediately suspend Iran. And finally it concludes, FIFA must choose a side. Neutrality from FIFA is not an option. Given that the Iranian FA has not been neutral, but has been mobilised to entrench the oppression and systematic exclusion of women in the sports ecosystem. Beyond women, the Iranian government has also stifled the voices of several athletes in the country and impeded their rights to speak in the face of evil on display. National team players like Hossein Mahani and Reef Gholami and prominent former players like Ali Karmi and Ali Dali have been targets for imprisonment, harassment and threats from the government. It's time for FIFA to take action. Enough is enough. Now that is a very powerful legal letter that has appealed to FIFA, saying by keeping the Iranian regime and its football team in this year's, or I should say next month's World Cup in Qatar, that FIFA is in breach of its own legal guidelines.
Yeah, it's so well researched, and the letters makes it so clear. There's Article 19, Article 16, the Iranian FA, whatever they call themselves, the federation, are breaking all those rules. But then, I mean, what we have to remember about Iran, it is an extremist Islamic nation, and extremist Islamic nations don't have a lot of time for women. I kind of find it very interesting. There's been an upsurge of interest in women's football, particularly in Europe and the world, really, and yet in Iran they're not even allowed to go into a stadium. That young girl who was killed in prison, she wasn't wearing the right equipment, the right dress code, but her hair was showing, and therefore they arrested her because some of her hair was out. You know, that could happen to, I mean, I have a bad hair day almost every day, and it's very easy to see that could easily happen without any intention, and yet she was arrested, tortured, and eventually murdered in prison. But they do have so little respect for the female, the woman in those nations. They're not even allowing them to be educated a lot of the time. So it is the final part of that statement you've just read is enough, and FIFA, you really do need to do the right thing at this time, because it is the right thing to do, and they would definitely have the support of 99% of the world nations. Of course, there'll be one or two who will come against them, particularly their friends Russia and their other allies, but generally it is enough. The time is right to do the right thing and actually remove them from this World Cup, because that'll be it'll be such a major media story anyway. It'll get a lot of viewing around the world, radio stations and so on, and it'll bring to the highlight, it'll bring into the eyes or the ears of people who are not aware of what's going on in Iran, what it's really all about. And it's time, isn't it? We know that all around the world, for not only the rights of individual men or colour, race, doesn't matter, but women's rights.
Absolutely. I don't know if you saw the news last week, Alistair, about this very brave and courageous Iranian climber, and she was climbing a wall in the competition, and then she seemed to drop her hijab off on the floor. So what happened then was that it was seen as a sign that she was standing with the brave women of Iran, and her phone was taken by agents of the regime, and then there was a post on Instagram saying how that her headscarf fell off by accident. and it didn't mean to happen, and so therefore, you know, instead of her becoming a symbol of freedom for Iran, the regime posted these false messages. But she still had a massive reception when she arrived at Tehran airport, and now is under house arrest. So it just shows you the brutality. But the message it would send, I think, is it would pose a very, very difficult question for the regime to actually tell the Iranian people, who are sports mad, they love their football, they are a very sophisticated, ancient culture, and they're very different from the Arab people, because we've got to understand that the Iranians invented chess and they invented the Persian carpet. So we know that they're strategic thinkers and come from a very deep and ancient civilization as well. So the regime would then have to explain to the nation how the Iranian football team is not playing in next month's World Cup, which they will struggle to do. And then that will just fuel the flames of even more demonstrations against the regime itself, which doesn't have any legitimacy. So it's extremely interesting. But for football fans and England fans, and even Welsh fans, because Wales are in the same group as England in Pool B of the World Cup table, want to know what would happen if FIFA took decisive action and pulled out Iran's football team from next month's World Cup. Now, according to same article in Sports Talk, should Iran be banned from England's group, which also includes the United States of America, USA, as well as Wales. It says unclear as yet who that would be, but most likely the nation to be awarded with a tournament entry would be the United Arab Emirates, as they were the Asian nation that went furthest in the World Cup qualification, without reaching Qatar, having lost to Australia 2-1 in a playoff semi-finals in June. The Australians then went on to beat the South American team Peru on penalties in the final to book their spot in the FIFA Showpiece event. And we've also then the speculation that the Italians as well could also be drafted back into the World Cup after failing to qualify. Personally, as a massive England fan, I would not want to be in the same group as Italy in the World Cup. Having kind of bad record against them in the final, the Euros, and then in the Nations League as well, and then having to play them for the European qualifiers for the 2024 European Championships in Germany. I think that would be a bit too much. But we have that Labour MP Chris Bryant, who is the chair of the All-Parliamentary Group on Russia, has called for support for Iran to be banned. He told the Telegraph, sporting authorities around the world and in every sport should be looking very carefully at Iran's direct involvement and support for Putin in his illegal invasion of the Ukraine. Dictatorial regimes relish sporting success. We should deny them that opportunity.
Yeah. I agree with you totally. I wouldn't want to see Italy in our group. I'd love to see Italy, obviously, in the World Cup because they are a world-leading nation, having won the European Nations Cup just a couple of years ago. But put them in another group if they come in. It would change the whole criteria of that group because really we've got a very strong chance of coming through this group because Wales will play out of their skins when they're playing against England, of course.
That's England's final game, so that's
so by then hopefully everything is sorted. United States, they're a good nation, but if you suddenly bring Italy in replacing Iran, I mean the logical thing would be UAE because they are a neighbouring country, so support-wise they'll bring half their nation into the Qatar in order to support their team. But Ukraine, of course, would be the public's choice simply because of what's going on there. Absolutely. But we wait to see. I mean, the first thing they have to do is actually ban the Iranians and let that publicly be known and see how that affects like you talked about. They would have to explain away, and I'm sure they would find a way of making a full story up as to why they've been banned. But the world world is not that stupid. They know what's going on. They can see what's going on from the reports we've just watched.
And also the other thread to this story is that it's not only the Iranian people that are being affected by the Iranian regime, particularly in its brutal suppression of human rights, its brutal suppression of women's rights, but also the Ukrainian people are also alarmed at the prospect that the Iranians are supplying Putin with these kamikaze military drones that are killing innocent people in Kiev and across the Ukraine. So now we have a new situation where Shakhtar Donetsk, which is the famous Ukrainian football team, has demanded that Iran be thrown out of this year's World Cup and replaced by Ukraine over the Middle East states' participation in terrorist attacks during Russia's invasion of their homeland. So Sergei Polkin, the Shakhtar Donetsk chief executive, joined the mounting calls for FIFA to act just weeks before Iran's opening game against England following the so-called kamikaze drone strikes on his countries using equipment delivered by the Iranian authorities. And, this is what he says. Polkin says, while the Iranian leadership will have fun watching their national team play at the World Cup, Ukrainians will be killed by Iranian drones and Iranian missiles. Almost 250 such drones have already been attacked peaceful cities in the Ukraine. Each of them was produced, delivered by the Iranian authorities, Iranian instructors, and the military directly trained and managed the launches of these drones that destroyed homes, museums, universities, offices, sports grounds and playgrounds, and most importantly, killed Ukrainians. He says, including children. Children are also dreamed of seeing their national team at the World Cup. And Shakhtar Football Club calls on FIFA and the entire international community to immediately ban Iran's national team from playing at the World Cup for the country's direct participation in terrorist attacks on Ukrainians. And he says this will be a fair decision that should draw the attention of the whole world to a regime that kills its best people and helps kill Ukrainians. The vacant place should be taken by the national team of the Ukraine, which has proved that it is worthy of participation in the Mundial World Cup with their unequal conditions with other national teams during their playoffs. They played with their heart. So here we got the president of Shakhtar Donetsk, probably the biggest football club in the Ukraine. We haven't heard anything yet from the Ukrainian Football Association, but I'm sure we will do in due course, calling upon FIFA to take decisive actions. Here we've got the Iranian people and footballers calling for the team to be kicked out, and now we're having one of Ukraine's biggest football clubs also calling for the Iranians to be kicked out of this year's World Cup.
The argument is very valid, when they talk about Ukraine did get to the playoffs, but they had the disadvantage, great disadvantage, of not being allowed to play on their home ground. So, whereas other teams were playing home and away to qualify for the World Cup and in those playoffs, they weren't able to do that. They had to play away and away. And therefore, all the advantage of having your home crowd behind you was lost. And so they're totally valid because they are a good side. They're a good national team. They've played well. They've played with a lot of heart, as it was mentioned there. And it would be definitely a publicly supported event if they decided to put Ukraine in. And so I think I'm totally with Shakhtar Donetsk there in their argument. And the truth is, like they've said, hundreds of Ukrainians have been killed by these kamikaze drones. What horrible name to use on these killing machines that they send out. And kids who would have liked to have seen their team in the World Cup are not going to be able to watch it. And they're not going to be alive to watch anything, some of them. So yeah, I'm totally in favor of the FIFA taking a positive step and banning them and giving Ukraine an opportunity, or they can decide on another nation, because there are other nations that have a valid reason for being at the World Cup. But there's a valid reason why Iran shouldn't be at the World Cup, and that's the important thing to focus on.
We also see this group of Iranian footballers have called themselves United for Navid. It's a group of exiled Iranian athletes and activists have called on FIFA to impose the same punishment on the homeland as it did on Russia. They say clear that FIFA has banned Russia from participating in international competitions because of its invasion of the Ukraine and violation of human rights, he said in a statement. He also said that we respect this stance that FIFA has taken and that we will not tolerate the senseless killing and torturing of thousands of innocent civilians. We Iranian athletes ask that you apply the same to the Islamic Republic of Iran. Iran is brutally killing and torturing protesters and oppressing women by their criminalizing of watching football or showing a few strands of hair. FIFA's silence is an endorsement of these human rights violations. So let's have a look now. These excellent CBN news reports are saying how the Iranian regime is supplying Putin with these kamikaze military drones that are striking fear and terror into the hearts of the Ukrainians, particularly in Ukraine's capital of Kiev.
This is the aftermath of one of the many Russian attacks against Ukraine using Iranian-made drones. While Russia denies Iran is supplying it with drones, the Pentagon disagrees.
What that means, obviously, again, we continue to see Iran be complicit in terms of exporting terror, not only in the Middle East region, but now also to Ukraine.
These drones are, about as big as a person or two people, so they're not huge, and they carry a warhead, and the warhead can basically be used to slam into something. Now, in the case of the Russians, they're using this to basically terrorize civilians by attacking apartment complexes and going after the power grid and stuff.
Seth Frantzman, author of the book Drone Wars, warns Iran has become expert in drone technology and that Israel will likely face these kinds of Iranian-made drones.
I think clearly in any future war, we'll see that drones will be flying at Israel and attacking Israel from Iran, Iraq, maybe even from Yemen, and also, of course, from Syria and Lebanon. This is a way for Iran to extend the front line against Israel to a 4,000-mile front line. And that makes it more complicated to interdict and stop them and predict them and detect them.
But for Europe, the future is now.
These are Iranian rockets which are coming to Russia and going to be launched on European soil. They're going to kill European citizens, European energy infrastructure. It's well past time for the Europeans to actually start doing something.
Noronha and Frantzman say the way the government of Iran is cracking down on the protests in its streets and this unholy alliance between Iran and Russia are a wake-up call to the West.
They're starting to realize that Iran doesn't share their interests and that Iran doesn't want peace and cooperation with the West. So it's sort of this common realization of just how dangerous Iran has been.
Finally, the West is waking up and saying, you know what, this is really not a regime that we can deal with. And the fact the Iranians are working with the Russians, and now the Iranians are terrorizing Ukrainian civilians with the drones, I think really everyone is saying, no, this regime is just awful, and we cannot ignore how bad it is anymore. And I think that's a big shift.
But the question remains, will Iran pay any consequences for its alliance with Russia? Right now, it's up to the U.S. and Europe.
It's a sound everyone in Kiev dreads to hear. The buzzing of the slow, low-flying Iranian drones homing in on their targets. Since Ukraine's successful attack on the Russian bridge to Crimea, the sound has become increasingly common across this country. Explosions reverberated across Kiev Monday as a new wave of Russian kamikaze drone attacks hit the city. Ukrainian forces claim to have shot down several of the drones, while others struck residential areas in the city center. Meanwhile, reports of up to 9,000 Russian conscripts arriving in Belarus are boosting speculation that Russia is preparing to open a new front against Ukraine in the north, possibly with the help of Belarusian forces. But Zelensky warned the result would only be more Russian body bags.
Thousands of Russians are dying, and their lives mean nothing to their president. They are thrown into attacks with anti-retreat forces at their backs, and when they die, they are left to rot, not even counted. They have nothing to live for, and they lose the lives given to them by God so shamefully.
Once the bombs stop falling and the air raid sirens quit, people here in Kiev come out of their bomb shelters and basements and go about their lives, just trying to achieve some sense of normalcy here in the face of these continued Russian attacks. Last week, a bomb fell right here in this children's playground, and today there are already kids back here playing once again. It's kind of the new normal here in Kiev, and the question is how long it will last.
I think people just carry on as normal as much as they can. Yeah, like you said, the missile on Monday, one of them hit just up the road there, but the traffic's already going. in the park here. There's people busking, buying coffees. You can buy food and sit and drink a coffee in the park. And there was an air raid siren just about 10 minutes ago. As soon as that's over, people just come out from the metro or the shelters and they just carry on with what they're doing. It's all you can do, really.
Churches were full here on Sunday with the faithful praying for an end to the conflict. And in Kiev's central square, this drummer led people in an impromptu praise and worship service.
Ukraine is winning the war. I think you look at what's happening now. Russia annexed or said that they were annexing territories a couple of weeks ago, and right now Ukraine's already liberating quite significantly large areas of that. So I absolutely believe they can win, and they are winning. It's just a case of how long, and also a case of what Putin decides to do in the meantime.
From Kiev, I'm Chuck Holton for CBN.
And I don't think we can possibly begin to imagine what it's like to be in Kiev facing those kamikaze military Iranian-supplied drones that Putin is using to devastate and put fear into the hearts of the Iranian people. And that's why we need to kind of pray with them, but also need to speak out on behalf of the Iranian people, but also the people of Ukraine, and of course the people of Israel as well, and others across the Middle East and around the world that are suffering at the hands of this regime. And earlier in the program, Alistair, we started to talk about this new sinister alliance that is merging between Iran and Russia. And of course, now we're seeing the fruit of it essentially being played out in Europe. And one thing I think the EU need to understand, the British government, and we know we don't really have a proper government in place at the moment with our new Prime Minister, and also the administration and states need to understand, is that here the Iranians are supplying military drones to Russia to attack European civilians on the continent of Europe. This is not the Middle East. This is actually taking place in Europe. And according to the Times, had an editorial last week on Tuesday, the 18th of October, and they quote this. It said, when the Iranians made drones steered by Moscow drops explosives on European cities, it's time to get worried. Yet yesterday's attack on Kiev pointed to a sinister collaboration by an increasingly desperate Iranian leadership and an unstable Tehran. This is an access that is likely to have devastating geopolitical impact unless it's quickly nipped in the bud. And said this one, that Russia has ordered more than 2,000 Shahed drones from Iran. These will supplement shipments of Iranian Fatah 110 and Zogafar short-range ballistic missiles capable of striking distances between 300 and 500 kilometers. And they're designed to create terror and fear into the hearts of Ukraine's civilian population. We know that the world is acting tough against Russia for its invasion of the Ukraine. Isn't it time now also the international community started to get tough with Tehran and the Islamic Republic of Iran?
Has done in the past, and we've brought sanctions against them in the past. But I wasn't aware until recently how advanced their technology is in this drone warfare, if you want to call it that. And as we saw in that clip we just watched, the threat is beyond just what they're doing in Ukraine, because they will certainly use the same technology once they got a nuclear capability, not only to threaten but also to take action against Israel and other nations that surround. So yeah, it's a frightening situation for the whole world. And this alliance, we've all been concerned about it, particularly amongst us Christians who are watch over as watchmen over the walls of Jerusalem and about the Middle East. We always talk about how important it is for us to pray for peace of Jerusalem and the nations that surround, but how important it is for the nations now to actually come alive to this bigger threat, and that's coming from Iran. Because in the past, I think I said this earlier, you've just read the statistics about the missiles and the rockets, but they've been building more powerful rockets all along, going alongside the nuclear development, because the plan is, and has never changed, to wipe Israel off the face of the earth. So no wonder their technology is advancing in the same pace as their whole side of their power. And we need to be aware not only to pray for this, but we need to encourage our governments. Our own government is very pro-Ukraine, but we need to highlight the threat to world peace and Israel's peace, particularly, that is coming from Iran. Both Iran and Russia continue to threaten Israel to not supply Ukraine, for instance, with weaponry, and of course it's a concern for Israel, because like every other nation that looks at Russia, they're a major nation with major power. And my concern, actually coming back to Ukraine, I've actually walked through that park that we just saw the film of in the past when we've ministered there. But coming into the winters in Ukraine are very cold indeed. And now the Russians are specifically looking to attack the energy plants, which would mean they'd have a very, very cold winter. So again, as a nation, let's pray, but as a nation, let's support the Ukrainians in that battle. I know we're looking at Iran more importantly.
Absolutely, Alistair, but also I think we have to make an important fact that the Russians and the Ukrainians are breaking the Geneva Convention, because with these kamikaze military drones, they are not targeting military targets. They are targeting innocent civilians, such as residential housing blocks. And if you're in one of those housing blocks at the time, as we saw on that CBN news footage, you've really got not a lot of hope targeting power stations and railway stations. And according to the Times as well, the Russian army is in the Ukraine is now being directed by Russian commanders of the Syrian war in 2015. And according to the Times as well, that the chief effect of the Russian-Iranian drone warfare, however, is to globalize the Ukraine war. Putin had initially tried to weaponize the threat of famine to Asia and Africa, then threatened a tactical nuclear strike. The aim of both moves was to persuade the West to stop its arms delivery and political support for Kiev. And now the Kremlin has threatened to expand a European war into the Middle East in the hope that the fear of a more general conflagration will make the Biden administration step back. Now, this is very troubling now, what I'm going to read out now. So Dmitry Medvedev, who you will probably know as a former Russian president who took over from Putin only for 4 years until Putin then resumed the role as president, and also is a security hawk, has warned Israel that if it helps to fight the Iranian drones over the Ukraine, the quiet military cooperation between Russia and Israel will be scrapped. He says at present, Moscow, which controls the Syrian airspace, looks away when Israeli jets hit at Iranian bases and arms depots in Syria. Israel will soon have to make a choice. A Russian-Iranian military-industrial complex allowing Tehran to bankroll the rapid enlargement of its drone force and export them to proxy militias on Israel's borders poses an existential threat. And this is the difficult dilemma that Israel has faced. We know that, for example, President Zelensky is Jewish, and he's called upon the help of Israel to help the Ukrainians in their fight against the Russians. And now we see really that the Russians are blackmailing the Israelis on two counts. The one hand, they're saying that you need our green light in order to carry out precision guided missile attacks against Iran supplying Hezbollah with laser or guided missiles, which would be a game changer in the Middle East, would mean that the Hezbollah would have the chance then to target any targets, whether civilian or military targets in Israel. with precision-guided missiles. And also the other game changer is the fact that we also see there's something in the region of 80 or 90,000 Iranian militias and Revolutionary Guards troops stationed next door to Israel in Syria, together with Hezbollah having in the region of anything between 140 and 180,000 rockets and missiles targeted Israel. So Israel has to then prevent a lot of these missiles that the Iranians are actually putting on board civilian aircraft, flying them into Beirut, and then supplying them onto Hezbollah as well in their war against Israel. So at the moment, the Russians have turned a kind of blind eye to that, but they are threatening Israel, that if Israel then supports the Ukrainians and gives the Ukrainians the Iron Dome, then this will change this relationship between Israel and Russia. And of course, we know that Russia has also banned the Jewish agency from operating on its soil, which means that they put a stop to Russian Jews making aliyah to Israel in fulfillment of biblical prophecy.
In one of those earlier clips that we watched earlier in the program, it talked about this unholy alliance between Iran and Russia, and it's more than just unholy, it's a very dangerous alliance. And we're beginning to see that more and more because Iran has always been a terror machine, so to speak. You know, they've always provided the finances for terrorism all around the world, but particularly against Israel. And now we see their technology developing and getting more and more advanced, so they become a major player. And the worrying thing is that we've seen that these drones, kamikaze drones, seem to be able to get through the defense systems in many nations. Now, Israel has an amazing Iron Dome defense system, but has it been tested against these new drones? We don't know yet whether they are able to fly in at a lower level and therefore cause more devastation. But I'm sure the Israel Defense Force are very aware of the threat.
Yeah, I think what with these new drones is that they are kind of low technology, so they're not that sophisticated, and also that they are able to dodge radar, which are much needed to identify where these drones are and then to actually target them. But the danger is that this will be Iran's new tactical weapon in its war against Israel, as we saw in that excellent CBN News report of actually finding these drones from Yemen, from Syria, also from Lebanon, to target Israel as well. So this is a major thing that Israel needs to, and the international community have to stop this potentially new war. And this is also time where FIFA could gain a lot more credibility around the world after the awful corruption scandals it's been involved in giving Russia the 2018 World Cup, and also now giving the Qataris the World Cup for 2022, which is only next month. The World Cup is a wonderful celebration of sport and football around the world, where nations can compete against each other for what is the most glorious trophy in sport, which is the World Cup trophy. And it's not since '66 that our nation actually won the World Cup. And we have a good, very, very good team. We got a chance of making it quite far in this year's tournament. But also, I think it's important that our England team also speak up for the Iranian people and the people of Ukraine, and to say, look, the English FA should say, and the Welsh FA should say, not in our name. We want Iran kicked out of the FIFA World Cup, because quite frankly, to allow this is to turn your eye against the evil that the Iranian regime is committing.
I think you're so right, because if a major nation like UK, England and Wales were to make that stand and actually speak it out, I think you'd find a lot of the other European nations would come aboard and say the same things. And then FIFA would be put under a lot of pressure to do the right thing. And going back to our question at the start, is it right to kick Iran out of the World Cup? And I think we both agree, definitely yes, no matter what the result of that might be and what sort of a devastation it might cause within FIFA. I think the support of the world will be very much for them.
No, absolutely. Alistair, I just want to thank you so much for being my guest on Behind Headlines. As we've discussed, Iran's role in suppressing its own women and human rights abuses in Iran, where over 200 Iranian protesters have been murdered, including 23 children, and also the fact that the Iranians are using these kamikaze drones against Ukrainian citizens that the Russian forces are using in its war against Ukraine. It's unacceptable. I just want to thank you for watching this program at home. You know, we can all do our bit. We can all contact FIFA on social media. We can all speak out against the brutality of this Iranian regime. And it's time that FIFA had the bravery and the courage to kick out the Iranian football team from next month's World Cup in Qatar in the sake of the people of Iran and also Ukraine. So thank you for watching this week's edition of Behind the Headlines.